You can't handle the truth. What an ass. Hi guys, thanks for clicking in. Believe it or not, this is episode 5 of Mike's Bytes. Yeah, hard to believe I've been at this for 2.5 months. It sure has been a lot of fun, stepping out of your comfort zone just a little bit as I figured out how to do this stuff. And yeah, I know, I got a long way to go. That's part of the fun. Anyways, like I said in my first episode, the whole theme behind Mike's Bytes is to help people by helping them see there are different ways of looking at things. We change the world, starting with changing our worldview. So why should I bother? Besides looking for something to do when I retire, to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and just being another old fart like shooting his mouth off. Well, a long time ago, I had a friend. Yeah, I did. I had a friend. Yeah, actually, he was one of these happy guys. He was a friend of everybody. He was always willing to give you the shit off his back kind of guy. Always willing to help out when asked. Always had the couch available when you needed it. And back in those days, I took advantage of it quite a few times. It was one of those times when I was sleeping on his couch in one of my no-win situations when he looked at me and he said, "Mike, if you don't like your circumstance, change your circumstance." And he had a point. But it took me a while before I figured out that changing your circumstance starts with changing your point of view. Now, that friend of mine, he's long gone, unfortunately. The cancer took him when he was way too young. And I realized I never did repay him for that generosity that he had. Not that he would have wanted it anyways. But I realized I could have been a better friend at the time. So this is perhaps as a way of honoring him by trying to do for you what he tried to do for me. And that doesn't mean my couch is open to anybody, by the way. As my psycho puppies don't like strangers in their house. Yeah, their house. I'm just here to pay the rent. Anyways. And to be honest, I'm not an expert in anything, really. I've spent too much time behind the wheel to know too much about nothing. So I don't think it's up to me to tell you what to think, but I think it's within my rights and perhaps even my duty to suggest to you to try looking at things a little differently. Like the big picture. Like the B-man says, no one should call themselves a master because they all have something to learn. But everyone should be called a master because they all have something to teach, even as uneducated old farts. So, I think that's what the Buddha said anyways. Who knows? I wasn't around at the time. But what could I possibly tell you that you don't already know? He said, well, something that you may or may not know, but probably haven't considered too much, is that whatever you think you know won't be all there is to know. It's never the big picture. And if you're convinced you know the big picture, well, I'm going to tell you something. It ain't the biggest picture. That's just the way it is sometimes. There's always another angle to look at it. Nothing happens in isolation, be it in time or space. I remember an incident. I mentioned in my blog, Paradigms of Perspectives, once, a couple of times maybe, I don't know. It says, it was something with Mom. This happened years ago. And the details aren't important. It's just important to know that she wasn't happy about stuff. And it wasn't my fault, though, for a change. Although she was still ticked at me, actually was ticked off at everybody. And there was a bit of an irony, because at the time what I was trying to do was answer the golden rule, or a golden rule, which is if Mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. But sometimes Mama just don't want to be happy. Anyways, the discussion ended when she said, "You don't understand." To which I responded, "Yeah, Ma, I do understand. I just don't happen to agree with you." And she put in the final word by saying, "Well, if you understood, then you'd agree with me." And actually, over the years, I've heard that expressed many, many times. These people are just ignorant, or they're uninformed, or they're ill-informed. They just don't see the big picture. They just don't get it. And sometimes I think it's not them, it's the concluder that has the problem. And it's not that they're ill-informed. It's just that they can or won't see how other people might be looking at something. That's just the way it is sometimes. At first I thought Mom's response was an example of how people would rather be right than happy. It's just the way people are sometimes. But then I thought she might have been right. I didn't understand. She didn't want to hear an alternate point of view. What she wanted was somebody to agree with her. She wanted a little sympathy or compassion. And then I thought it was an example of the no-win argument. It's one of those mic drop moments when somebody thought that they bested everybody with a logic loop that nobody can respond to. In this case, no matter what I said after she said that was going to be proof that I didn't understand what she was saying. It's the way it was, unless I absolutely agreed with her. But now I see it's evidence of how two people can look at the same thing and come to opposite conclusions. the bigger picture will look different to different people, even between experts. That's the opposite to how most people think looking at the big picture is supposed to work. Most people believe the more we see of the big picture, the closer to the truth we get. But truth is relative. Yeah, it is. An alternate truth, or truer truth, won't become apparent until we're ready to see it. Now, I'm sure some of you guys may know who these guys are and what they're famous for, but today. But in case you don't, I'll tell you. These two guys are the father and son team of Louis and Walter Alvarez. They're the Batman and Robin of geology. They discovered the KT boundary, also known these days as the KPG boundary. It's a layer of ash and minerals between rock formations all around the world that mark the difference between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene period, okay? Between the time of the dinosaurs and the time of the mammals. Well, they didn't discover it so much as they figured out what it was. They concluded that the KPG was proof of a comet or asteroid striking the Earth, which what we believe now caused the extinction of the dinosaurs and just about everything other thing living on Earth about 65 million years ago. It's pretty common knowledge today, and at the time there were some scientists that suspected this is what happened, but they didn't have proof. But the scientific community as a whole wasn't too crazy about the theory. As a matter of fact, it pretty much ruined their careers. I think most of us pretty much understand how peer review works. So someone publishes their discovery in a journal, so other scientists can test and debate their findings to determine its validity, or whether something needs more work needs to be done. But what many of us don't seem to understand, that scientists are human just like the rest of us, and therefore are subject to the same biases, prejudices, and weaknesses as everybody else. It can take a long time for a theory to be accepted by the expert community. It took something like 20 years before the Alvarez hypothesis was generally accepted. And it wasn't until someone else discovered the impact crater in the Yucatan where we assumed the asteroid struck. And there's still people today, inside and outside the expert community, that think that the theory is not right, or completely right, or there's not the entire picture. And I think it's worth noting because there are some experts today that think similar boundaries in later strata indicate an asteroid strike on the North American ice sheet during the last ice age marked the big start of the Younger Dryas period, which is a big drop in temperatures right at the very end. And then another asteroid strike in the ocean about 11,600 years ago reversed the trend with a sharp increase in temperatures, which basically wiped out the megafauna, the saber-toothed tigers and the giant sloths and stuff like that. And along with it, all the advanced ancient civilizations that were around at the time. And that's why we can't find much evidence of them. They all got washed away with the rising seawaters. The reason that's important is that if these theories are true, then our entire understanding of history and the rise of our civilization has to be rewritten, and that can kind of hard on some people sometimes. Yeah, I actually think much of the resistance to new theories, no matter how obvious they are, eventually, can be traced back to people who spend a lot of times coming up with these theories and teaching these theories and defending these theories, not wanting to be told that they may have been wrong. So, even though they say, well, that's the whole idea of science, is this is prove yourself. Come up with a theory and then prove it wrong. But people are people, right? Just like the rest of us lay folk. I know. That's ancient history, so who cares? All right, well, let's try something closer to home. Do you know these guys? Well, if not, maybe you should, because they got a lot to do with why you're sitting at home miserable and not out on the street dying. These guys are Martinus Bayernik, I think Bayernik is the name, and Dmitry Ivanovsky, who independently but simultaneously figured out what viruses were back at the turn of the last century. Now, of course, they didn't figure it out all on their own. There were a lot of people who contributed over the decades and centuries to the discovery of viruses, even if they didn't know exactly that's what they were doing. And a lot of the time, what people suspected or figured out was met with opposition and downright arrogant ignorance. We'll get into a couple examples. And on top of that, a lot of times what helped bring science forward in one moment helped people back in some other ways. Okay, like this guy, Robert Koch. He had a lot to do with the development of germ theory. He says until his discoveries, the scientific community still believed that the diseases and that were passed along by miasma, like bad air. Again, common knowledge these days, not so much back then. And again, it took time before the understanding that microbes were the cause of infections and diseases were commonly accepted. And to help out, Koch came up with a list of criteria that had to be met in order to isolate the disease-carrying microbes. And they were called Koch's postulates. Big words. Now here's what they are here. And it all worked well and good, except some of the diseases didn't seem to fit. And guys like Bayernik and Ivanovsky, it kept getting stymied trying to figure out why that was so. Like, why wasn't this working? You know, they questioned their results, they questioned their methodologies, they even questioned themselves. And it wasn't until I think Bayernick decided to look outside the box and question the big picture. And that's when he figured out that viruses, the reason they couldn't find the viruses is because they were just too small to be found with the testing systems that they had at the time. Now, Koch saved a lot of lives with his discovery because it caused people to see the different image of the big picture, which caused a change of behavior. You know, like doctors washing their freaking hands before they operated on a patient. You know, common sense now, not so much common sense back in the day. You know, but at the same time, his postulates held back the development of science and virology by like some 20 years by estimates. And it wasn't so much the postulates themselves, but the scientific community's reluctance to question them once they were generally accepted. So who knows how the outcomes of epidemics and pandemics over the last century might have been different have medical science been 20 years ahead of what it is now. Yes, so something to think about. These are just a couple examples, but this slow evolution of the big picture can be seen in every scientific and academic endeavor. You know, like evolution, our cosmology, our psychology, our physics, our politics, anything, you name it. Our advancement as a species has always struggled with our opposing desire for change and to resist change because of how we think it might alter the big picture, while at the same time not quite understanding it's not the big picture but our perception of it that changes. And if experts in the same field could look at something and come to opposite conclusions, then what hope do the rest of us finite creatures trying to make our way through an infinite universe have to have, eh? How can we possibly know what version of the big picture is the right, only, and final version? We can't, really. And if that's the case, then why even bother expanding our personal horizons? Well, we can't know if what we see is all there is to see, just like we can't know it isn't. But in my opinion, finding the truth is not as important as the search. It's like that old cliche, it's not the destination, it's the journey that counts. I believe we owe it to ourselves and the people around us to stay just a little bit out of our comfort zone when it comes to our image of the big picture, as long as we don't go too far. This little chart I came across while researching this episode shows the conclusions made by a couple of psychologists named Yerkes and Dodson. Yeah, I know, they sound like a couple of characters from the Sunday Funnies, don't they? Anyhow, back at the turn of the last century, a lot of stuff was said went on back at the turn of the last century, wasn't there? These guys were experimenting with rats. Yerkes and Dodson concluded performance can increase when we're just a little out of our comfort zone, but not too far. Yeah, scientists did like to compare us with rats, don't they? And I'll skip over the part where they use electric shock on the rats to show that too much anxiety actually decreases performance. You know, we did a lot of dickies things over the centuries to further our knowledge, haven't we? I don't want to tell you your view of the big picture is wrong. It's probably not, but it's probably not complete either. That's something up for you to decide. But I will warn that when people decide to expand their horizons to see the bigger picture, most of the time they've already decided what the big picture is going to look like. What they're really looking for is ways to confirm the world is as they already see it. And I think that gets us into trouble because when we look for and find evidence that shows the world is what we thought it was all along, we become all the more determined to resist those people who see things a little differently. And perhaps the only thing more devastating to the human race than plagues and pandemics is all the suffering we've caused each other over the different ways we think the big picture looks. And that, my friends, is why I do this. So if seeing the big picture doesn't make you just a little bit uncomfortable, then maybe you should look again. Besides, it's one of life's ironies. Life is a little more interesting when you're just a little outside of your comfort zone, because life is kind of boring when you're inside it. Anyways, so what do you think? Has this no normal caused you to see the world a little differently, or has it only made you more confident with the world as you already saw it? Yeah, please enter your thoughts in the comments. Now, if you like this, please hit the like button. If you didn't, hit the like button anyways. I need all the help I can get. And if you'd like to know more about history of virology and the alternate theories of the start of civilization, then you might want to check out these videos. So until I see you again in 2 weeks, stay safe. Have a great day, everyone. Now go be the heroes of your own stories. Mikey out.